They're going to be
Be seen.
Yes.
Very festive.
Yes. Some will look like Easter and some will look like a fiesta.
Jesus and ask him to forgive me for the things I'd done wrong and turn over the control of my life to him. As I was growing up, we had a lot of financial problems. We really need to trust the Lord, and the Lord will get us through that. And because of all those very difficult situations, instead of destroying my faith grew.
Hey guys, it's Katie from Without a Crystal Ball. Do you guys have an idea about what's going on with Counting On? Because I don't. But I was just rewatching the special that they had on TLC right around Easter. And I did a video about it, and I remember saying it felt so weird. It felt so disjointed. It felt like something was off. This was around the same time that the Duggars were actually not even telling anyone about relationships, that Jed and Katie quietly got to know each other and didn't tell anyone that there was a engagement. We didn't even find out about Jed's marriage until after they were married because he didn't announce anything until then. He said he wanted privacy. But I was rewatching this, and with this being mid-June and we have not had an announcement from TLC about Counting On, I think, and I could be wrong, but I think the special that they aired very abruptly this spring might have been their last episode. And I want to show you why. First off, typically the Duggars air in July. Last year, the show aired in July with no specials in the middle of the year. Nothing. The season is generally around 12 to 15 episodes. The last season had around 11 or 12. The last episode of this season aired randomly as a special with the title of A New Life. Now, that wouldn't have made that much of a difference because it's still considered part of season 11, but it was promoted by the network as a special. And it was an incredibly disjointed episode. In fact, there was a lot more God offered in this episode. They all sat in a church and talked about their testimonies. Something I noticed right off the bat was that John and Abby were in this episode and never said a word. I was like, why are they even here? They're not even talking. Joseph, when they went through testimonies, also didn't speak. Now, I can't say that they didn't speak on camera and maybe theirs were super boring compared to others, but it all felt very awkward to me because the only people that spoke were Michelle, Jim Bob, Kendra, Jessa, and Ben. Nobody else. Then, at the very end of this episode, which again, I think was super weird, there was no adults there at all. So typically on Counting On, we would have seen the adult children who were on the show all come together. And that had been consistent throughout all the seasons. So generally, we would have seen Josiah and Lauren, Joy and Austin, Ginger and Jeremy might have been Skyped in. There might have been John and Abby. There could have been a little bit, we would have seen Jed, Jeremiah, we would have seen James. None of those people were in this episode at all, in that section at all. So at the very end, Jim Bob made this really, really awkward thing. And as he was coming to the group, he said this.
Well, we've got a lot of our family here, not everybody. As our family gets bigger, sometimes it's hard to get everybody together. So we're so happy for you guys. Yay. Kendra, you look amazing.
Now, I remember seeing this and I remember thinking, my goodness, that is so awkwardly placed. Like, he had to come up with something on the fly for why no one was there. The audience was gonna notice that there was tons of people missing. Josiah and Lauren weren't even in there. Like, they didn't show up at all in the entire episode. Joy only showed up at the very beginning, and Austin was not involved whatsoever. And Ginger and Jeremy were not at all featured. Now, Ginger and Jeremy, who are prominently some of the more popular on the show, I mean, they do say they're the breakout stars, but I'm serious. They are fan favorites. And their storyline in Los Angeles gives a layer of difference to the story that's so boring for many fans. So I was like, I remember thinking this at the time, like, another thing was like, where are Jed and Jeremiah? Even if they had moved out, Jed and Jeremiah had always been these two mainstays that remained close to the family and were prominently featured on Counting On, and yet there they were, nowhere to be seen. Josiah and Lauren also absent. I also noticed in this episode that Miss Michelle looked very gaunt. Now, I understand that stress can make you lose weight, that stress can make you, tired and, feeling really anxious, but I noticed she looked fatigued. Now, this was filmed in the very beginning of February or the very end of February or early March, because that's when Brooklyn was born, because they were introducing Brooklyn to the family. So with Brooklyn being introduced to the family, and I also should note that Kendra said she called him Joe's family, which I thought was another weird sort of way of saying, like, we're going to introduce him to the family. She really prefaced it as Joe's family. Now, also, with that being said, they were in there in the very beginning of March filming this. Anna, at the time, looked pregnant, which we know she already was. She also looked very tired. Another thing I noticed, in addition to all of this, is that there seemed to be tension between everyone. Like, they were supposed to be doing this really joyous event, and everyone just seemed really flat. And so as I'm watching this all, and I'm like, okay, Jim Bob says this really weird thing about this. Michelle's obsessed with deviled eggs. She can't even call deviled eggs eggs. Like, she's more afraid of Satan getting into your eggs than she is of her son. I mean, think about that. Like, she calls them angel pocket eggs because you don't want to, give credence to the devil, because Satan.
Yellow pocket angel eggs with. Yellow pocket angel eggs are just basically hard-boiled eggs, and you pop the center, the yellow out, and then you mix mayonnaise, a little bit of mustard, and a little bit of garlic. And everybody loves them. And
so Michelle does this stuff with the cooking, which was really weird. Like, when was the last time we saw Michelle cooking? They talk tons about their faith. Jim Bob has this really weird thing where he's talking about how, it's hard to get the family together. And then at the very end, they make this thing about how, like, they're like, oh, we're looking forward to this in the spring. And she's like, more babies and, budding relationships. And Jim Bob's like, it's so great. We almost have, we've got 20 grandkids and maybe we'll have 200.
It's really amazing that we now have 20 grandchildren. And so our family is quickly growing. It's going to be 50, won't be too long, it'll be 100, maybe we'll break 200 before it's over with.
That are brewing and coming about, and then new babies that'll be here. Just very thankful, so much to be grateful for.
I'm starting to feel like this might have been the finale. Like, this was the grand finale of the show. Like, they were like, TLC maybe caught wind of everything coming down. We know the grand jury was going on at some point during this time. The investigation was heating up, and I'm wondering if Jim Bob was unable to secure a renewal given the cloud that was going on related to Josh Duggar. When this all came about in 2019, Jim Bob and Michelle denied everything, and so people were wondering if they were going to cancel the show. Part of me thinks that maybe TLC granted a renewal for the next season with the hopes that it was like nothing, and maybe Jim Bob actually said it was nothing. And maybe as the investigation was impossible for TLC to ignore, understanding the PR nightmare of being involved in this, I'm guessing there might have been some renewal issues. There was a lot of rumblings that there were contract issues, and at one time I thought it had to do with COVID because, COVID, it was hard to film. But none of that actually makes sense because they had testing going on by then. They could have all theoretically been tested and had this whole thing together. I have this sense that the kids had known something was going on with Josh. I have a sense that there was distancing happening here because Josiah and Lauren dumped Instagram in November of 2020, haven't posted since. You see obvious tension between Joseph and his parents in this episode. John, David, and Abby don't even look like they want to be there. And Jim Bob trying to scramble for a reason for why his kids aren't there. I think by the time they aired this episode and put this together, there just wasn't enough kids that wanted to be involved. And I think even though they didn't know that this was coming because they had no idea what Josh was involved with, I think there had been a brewing feud in the family, a distancing in the family, and a separation happening. I think once that raid happened, I think some old wounds started to open up. I think maybe something happened between the Caldwells and the Duggars that might have been related to Josh, although I don't know why. My only thought here is that when the HSI, when they initially went to properties that they believed were connected to Josh, they went to a home. Now we know that Jim Bob Duggar was renting a house to the Caldwells. And Jim Bob Duggar, the home was near the car lot. So if HSI went to this home believing it was a Duggar home and thinking that Josh Duggar lived there, perhaps Paul and Christina were put on the spot when HSI investigators showed up with a warrant related to CSAM. Because within a few months of the raid, Paul and Jim Bob had a feud related to something that happened at church, and it spilled over into their personal lives, resulting in Jim Bob kicking him out of that house. Something happened at that house, and I think it has to do with the HSI investigation. And I think maybe Jim Bob was maybe blaming him, maybe trying to pin this on Paul, and maybe Paul, catching wind of this, realized the magnitude of what they were involved in and wanted nothing to do with it. But the abruptness that Jim Bob wanted to get Paul off that property following the raid is telling to me. Not only that, Joseph Duggar at that same time separates and spends less time with his parents, I'm told, and they take the side with the Caldwells. Joseph was one of the only brothers that spoke publicly back in 2015 about his utter disappointment with Josh, making me believe that once Joseph might have found out about what happened at that house, how upset it must have made Paul and Christina, the precarious situation it may have put them in, perhaps that's what caused the rift. I have to be clear, Josh Duggar never once attended the church that Paul Caldwell goes to and runs. Josh and Anna went to a separate church. They were never members. Josh Duggar was never in the nursery at that church. Josh Duggar at Lighthouse Baptist Church is not a factor. I think the feud comes down to HSI attempting to raid potentially the house that Paul and Christina lived in. So, knowing all of this, and that at the very end of that episode, they're like, we're looking forward to this, we're looking forward to that, and now, June 15th, we have no renewal date for Counting On by TLC. I think this show might be over. But this is my opinion. Tell me what your thoughts are about all of this in the comments below. Bye, guys.